As a species, we really enjoy chaos, and when I use this term chaos, I'm not referring to destruction and mayhem, but something a bit closer to a more academic descriptor, such as a chaotic system. Chaos has this strange hypnotic effect that places us in an almost trance-like state. And to give a few examples that are sure to resonate with you so you know what I'm talking about, there is running water, whether this is water flowing through a river or ocean waves crashing on a shoreline. You can look at an open flame, for example, a campfire. There is the wind blowing through the leaves of trees. There is looking at clouds, cloud gazing, the various shapes and forms and figures of that, or even something as simple as looking at ants crawl on an anthill. These are all things that I'm sure at least one of them has activated that circuit in your brain that places you in that trance-like state that I'm referring to, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And all of these things that I mentioned are examples of chaotic systems. Chaos is a very interesting and odd concept, and I believe that within it, it holds the secret to the nature of reality, or at the very least, the nature of human consciousness, the way that we perceive reality. And this is literally the most complicated topic you can choose to try and do a video on. I mean, we are talking about the limit case of human understanding, but there is something that lies within chaos that will lead you to a special realization or a special doorway that it is ultimately up to you to enter or not. But before we get there, there are two questions that we have to address. The first one being, what exactly is chaos? Well, chaotic systems are systems that are deterministic, but for whatever reason, they are unpredictable. It's officially defined as a system that is hypersensitive to its initial starting conditions, and this hypersensitivity leads to unpredictable results. This is the official orthodox way of viewing it, and there are all kind of wonderful resources online to describe what chaos is exactly, and they can show you all of the maths involved, and it's quite beautiful. I encourage you to check out those avenues. But after you do that, you will wind up with this feeling that something is missing. Yes, the math is beautiful, but it doesn't explain the most important component of this, the second question of why are things chaotic? And once you start exploring this side of the coin, once you investigate why, you will revisit the what with completely new eyes. And that doorway that I mentioned, or that special realization that I mentioned, will become apparent. And to figure out why things are chaotic, you have to look into the essence of chaos itself. When you break down the fundamental property of all chaotic systems, what does that look like? What is the common denominator? And I've made a simple infographic so you can visualize what I'm talking about. This is the essence of all chaotic systems, this thing that I have displayed on the screen. You have the initial starting conditions, or the input, which makes complete and perfect sense. And then you have the end state, the output, which makes complete and perfect sense as well. And in the middle, you have chaos. To try and rephrase it, you can view chaos as the intent to put into language the relationship of input A to output B. How does A arrive at B? How does A cause B? But it isn't just about making future predictions, which is the most common way that we encounter chaos. It can be referring to the past as well. It can be, how did A cause B? How did A arrive at B? We often find that when we try and retrace our steps, we encounter chaos. I mean, the most chaotic point in the history of the universe was at its inception, at its birth. We always see this concept of chaos emerging whenever we try to place our microscope, place our magnifying glass, and examine the exact relationship between 2 points, between an input and an output. You can take this simple infographic and apply it to any chaotic situation, any chaotic system. It scales up or down, which I'll go into more detail later. This is the basic essence of what they are trying to get at, what the situation entails. And if you are clever, you will see that when we are studying chaos, what we are actually trying to discover is the nature of change. Asking how does A become B is the same as asking what changed in between point A and point B. And when you realize this, it sort of blows the lid off of the whole situation, and you are able to have a much deeper conversation that inevitably involves analyzing the metaphysics of everything. Change is the magic word here, and I mean this in a very literal sense. You see, whenever you are looking at chaotic systems, the most common culprit is what they describe as motion. Trying to explain motion with precision is where most chaos comes from. You can take a bowl of water and simply swish your hand around in it briefly, and you have created something that is completely incalculable. As a matter of fact, if you can somehow figure that out, you would instantly become a millionaire. This is one of the Millennium Prize problems, trying to figure out how fluid dynamics work. And if you pay attention, you'll see that all of the examples that I gave in the beginning of the video involve this kind of fluidity. This is precisely why calculus was invented. In mathematics, dealing with curves is a very messy process, and you have to enter into a world of approximations, very fine approximations. If you look at a circle, it seems simple enough, but the mere concept of it is very difficult to deal with mathematically. I mean, look at pi. It is irrational and endless. So what they did was decide to treat it not like a circle. If I can take this circle and treat it as a polygon with an endless amount of sides, then we can deal with it. It's kind of like taking an image and zooming all the way into it, and you find out that it's made up of tiny little pixels, tiny little squares. This is essentially what we did with circles, and as a result, we were able to figure out the orbits of planets, amongst other things. Because what a curve is, the mere concept of it, it is a continuous, smooth transition. There are no breaks or corners in it. So we had to put breaks and corners in it in order for it to make sense to us. And it is all because of this word change. The way that we perceive reality, the way that we perceive change. Change is the missing component in all of our logic. As a matter of fact, it has to be the missing component because logic can only form in the absence of change. You see, the way that we currently view it, chaos is sort of born from this nonlinear nature of motion. But I believe that it's actually the opposite, that motion is an emergent property of chaos. Or to rephrase it, we view things as changing because it has motion or momentum, as it's more accurately phrased. But this idea that I have is actually the opposite, that things have momentum. Things are in motion because they are changing. Motion is an emergent complexity, an emergent property of chaos. Or to break this down in the simplest way possible, change is chaos. They are one and the same. And trying to explain what I mean by this is going to be tricky without having some kind of mental overload, but I'll give it my best shot. In real life, in reality, things are smooth and continuous, but there is something going on with us, with consciousness in general, where we do not perceive it that way. We have these natural gaps in our perception, and it is within these gaps, these in-between points, where chaos lives, where chaos emerges from. We sort of see reality as a sequence of events, kind of how a camera operates, how it shoots in frames per second. We stitch these frames together and we call this motion or momentum or things actually happening. But if I'm doing anything, if I'm falling from the sky and I'm being filmed at 60 frames per second, there is obviously a lot of information lost in that process. There are all of these gaps, all of this lost information that takes place in between these frames. So what we do, in an attempt to make things appear smoother, we add more frames per second. We film at a higher frame rate. We fill the same amount of time with more frames. We jam more pixels into the same amount of space. We add more and more definement. This is the same thing that we do mathematically with calculus in the circle. It is defined all the way down until it's some kind of weird polygon with an endless amount of sides. And it appears that we can keep defining and defining with no end in sight, because whenever we try and fill these gaps in our perception, these natural gaps, we find eternity. We find infinite definition. We find fractals. This is where fractals come from. I don't know if you know that, but fractals are an expression of chaotic behavior. Whenever we try to directly observe change, the thing that smoothly connects input A to output B, it appears fractal, it appears chaotic, it appears infinite. You don't have to be some kind of math whiz to understand what I'm saying, that if you try and count from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 2, you can never reach it, because in between 0 and 1, there are an infinite amount of numbers. Whenever we try and see exactly how things connect, we find some kind of infinity. There is always this sea of infinite details that we are confronted with. And what I believe is that this phenomenon is a result of our perception. It has something to do with consciousness, which is why I talk about it so often, and it is the focus of this channel. This is some kind of illusion, for lack of a better way of saying it. And people get me confused, or this channel confused, that when I speak, this mystery that I am buried in, this thing that I'm trying to solve, isn't about math or science or philosophy or any form of logic. It is perception, the mystery of perception, how we perceive reality. And being that logic is an extension of our perception, I just happen to cross paths with these subjects. There is something about the way that we perceive reality that holds some great key, some missing factor. I've been digging into this mystery for quite some time now, and I don't believe that details are a real thing, or at the very least, they aren't what we think that they are. These things that we call details or things, they aren't actual things. There is only one smooth continuum, if you want to call it that, the monad, some kind of oneness. There is only one thing that we perceive as being many things. And I'm going to dive deeper into that shortly, but you see, the idea of a curve, the idea of smoothness is something that we cannot work with. We literally have to find techniques to work around it. It's almost as if we are hitting something. We are running up against some kind of invisible wall, some kind of hidden factor that we are refusing to acknowledge. As a matter of fact, as soon as the concept of a curve enters the picture, so does the idea of a ratio. This is how we address it in terms of ratios. Pi is a ratio. Frames per second is a ratio. And ratios are rates of change. It is an attempt to calculate, capture, or put into language some underlying principle that is nonsensical on its own. And what I hypothesize all the time on this channel is that this can all be traced back to a hidden dimension, not just some random thing that I made up, but this is something that people have been talking about for thousands of years. This is the oldest idea that the human being has had. There is some kind of hidden factor that is involved in all of reality. And it all deals with this word change. I've been going down these various rabbit holes trying to understand what it actually means for something to happen, what that actually entails. And I can see that there is some kind of domain, dimension, or plane where it is just pure possibility. It is everything that exists before it starts existing. It is a place where everything is possible. There are no details. Nothing is differentiated. Anything can be anything at any time, at any place. And we live on some opposite side of that. We have to wait for things to actually manifest. And when these things manifest, when they actually become things, they give this illusion of momentum. They give this illusion of change, but the change only occurs in that plane. It's very difficult to grasp and to put into language. It is precisely where left and right meet. To us, we can only see the left or we can only see the right. But if you try and discover the exact quanta of where these two things meet, where left actually turns into right, you will encounter this domain that I'm talking about. It is where change actually occurs. And I think that this domain has something to do with what they call in fractal mathematics a strange attractor. Whenever you are looking at a chaotic system, even though everything is unpredictable and moving around in all of these chaotic ways, there is still a general pattern that things follow. There is this embedded order that appears to emerge from the chaos. Things that we consider to be pattern, information, knowledge, all of these terms that I have historically used on this channel to describe the way that we perceive reality, they all begin to emerge from this chaos. And similar to the way that planets orbit the sun, for example, due to gravity, gravity is the attractor that keeps these celestial bodies in this continuous loop. There is some hidden factor, some mysterious domain that is causing all possible possibilities to manifest around it. Everything that can happen has to happen. And nothing can ever repeat. They say that this is sensitivity, that infinitesimally small differences in input lead to unpredictable outputs. But I think that this word sensitivity is a pretty silly term to use because sensitivity implies that there is some kind of upward bound, that there is a limit because something can only be so sensitive. But there doesn't appear to be any limit to it. That would make this the most sensitive thing in the universe. I think a better term would be something like a possibility generator or something like that. It kind of reminds me of this concept that Terence McKenna used to talk about, how reality was some kind of novelty machine, some type of novelty engine that you can put in whatever input you want. They can be as similar as possible, but you will get a different output. You will get something that is truly unique and will never be repeated again. This doesn't have to be some kind of abstract concept. You can take two identical twins, two conjoined twins, and they can have a nearly identical upbringing, but they will become two completely different people. Your life is a chaotic system. I'm sure most of us aren't anywhere where we thought we would be based on our projections from when we were younger. And there are all of these different chaotic systems that are embedded within each other. You can view them as boxes that you can place things in. For example, a country is a chaotic system. A family is a chaotic system. Individual life is a chaotic system. And they are all sort of placed within each other like these Russian doll toys. But despite all of this uniqueness, despite all of these chaotic, disparate outcomes, everything makes sense. Everything falls into some kind of hidden order. And this hidden order is caused by this strange attractor, or as I phrase it, there is some kind of hidden possibility dimension. And depending upon your perspective, different layers of this order become revealed to you. I talk about this in one of my earlier videos titled, Chaos is a Pattern That We Can't Comprehend. Depending on the amount of information that you have, your perspective, or how zoomed in you are to whatever process you are trying to observe, that determines if it appears chaotic or not to you. For example, we can predict what groups of people are going to do more efficiently than what an individual is going to. Because if I look at everyone as a group, I sort of have this top-down viewpoint. I'm looking at everything from up above. But if I try and predict at the individual level, then it becomes chaotic. This is where we all live, trying to live and cope with our daily stresses of surviving in nature. We can predict as a society that X amount of car crashes are going to happen each year, but you never know whenever you start the ignition if you're going to become one of those numbers, if you're going to be a statistic. But the part about all of this that I think people get confused, at least when it comes to me, they think that I'm talking about some kind of fantasy world, some kind of magical place, that this is all some kind of escapism, when it's actually probably closer to the opposite. This is some kind of trapism, some kind of metaphysical situation that we all find ourselves in. Whenever you go outside, does it look like the sky is falling? Everything is in perfect working order. There is some kind of way that we view reality that causes the full picture to be obscured, that's all. And we make these grand sweeping generalizations about reality when we don't have all of the information. I argue that we don't even have a fraction of the information. We are all trapped within the context of our own understanding. We are trapped within the walls of our own mind. And it has something to do with the nature of consciousness. This is why I am so obsessed with it, why I talk about it so much on this channel. Consciousness and this hidden dimension, this strange attractor, they have a very odd and complex relationship. And I ultimately believe that consciousness emerges from it. It is where consciousness comes from, and you can go down whatever spiritual rabbit hole or believe whatever story you want to about the origins of consciousness, but the overwhelming majority of inquiry, both scientific and spiritual, all seem to point that consciousness emerged from this domain that I'm referring to. And the reasons why this occurred, I mean, that's really up for debate. There are all kinds of myths and legends surrounding this topic. Some people say it was some kind of mistake, some kind of rebellion. Other people say that it was all a part of some grand cosmic design. Who knows? I can only tell you the way that I see it after digging into this topic for so long. The reason why this dimension is obscured from us is because we are conscious. Consciousness itself is a possibility. It is manifested potential, and the reason why we cannot see this dimension or this strange attractor is because we are looking at it. The reason why we have to convert this curve, this concept of change, we have to turn it into line segments is because that's what consciousness is. It is segmented. We are in this weird cosmic metaphysical version of the observer effect, like the one that we find in physics with wave-particle duality and the collapse of the wave function. Simply by consciousness existing, by you being conscious, you are interfering with the measurement of whatever it is you are trying to observe. You can think about it like this. In my most recent members video, I talk about this concept of attention, that consciousness can be boiled down to attention. And what attention is the elimination of change. It is the elimination of all other possibilities. It's almost like taking a snapshot with a photograph. That's what consciousness is. It is the reduction of everything into a single dense instance. We call this a moment in time. One of my commenters from a recent video brought up how Alfred North Whitehead describes this as grasping. It is the same principle, and many people come to this conclusion. Consciousness is the ability to know. What knowledge is pattern apprehension. It is the ability to perceive pattern. And what patterns are things that are not changing. They cannot change. Once something breaks pattern, it ceases to be a pattern. It becomes chaotic. And we're right back to where we started with this video. It doesn't make sense to us, and we aren't able to pay attention. Perhaps the way that I started this video with, the leaves being blown by the wind, the water ripples and things like that, the reason why we enter into this relaxed state when we view these chaotic systems is because we stop paying attention. We sort of enter into this relaxed mind state where the necessity for immediate attention is temporarily suspended. The mere act of perceiving is to break up the smoothness that is reality, this oneness. It is to break it up into categories. This isn't even about intellect. There are primal ways we do this. This is the senses. You divide reality into colors and sounds and smells, but in actuality, reality is all of those things smushed together simultaneously. We are like these prisms that this oneness is being filtered out through. The philosopher Leibniz had this metaphysical system where reality is constructed up of all of these little monads, these tiny singularities. I prefer to call these perspectives. This is what consciousness is. It is to have a perspective, a unique individual perspective. This is what the possibility generator produces. Simply by you being conscious, you have a perspective. And what a perspective is, it is to be closed off. It is to live within the confines of your own understanding. To put it as simply as possible, to be conscious, or at the very least, the consciousness that we have all grown to understand and experience, is to be ignorant. It is to not know. And this ignorance creates a unique perspective. I can never have your perspective, and you can never have mine. And you may be thinking that I've fallen into some kind of paradox. How can I state that consciousness is the ability to know, and then directly after state that to be conscious is to be ignorant? This is because the ability to know and ignorance go hand in hand. They are two sides of the same coin. They are the yin and yang pulling on each other. In order for me to have the ability to know, there has to be something that I don't know. There has to be ignorance. It is the dance of the known and unknown, literally. And to wrap this video up, you could say that this oneness has broken itself down into an infinite amount of pieces. And what I believe is happening is that it is putting itself back together again. This consciousness that we have, this perspective, what we all appear to be doing is trying to get back to that state of oneness, or the monad, or unity, or wholeness, however you want to phrase it. To us, we call this learning. Perhaps you call it evolution. We are born in this state of ignorance where we are surrounded by the unknown, and we are trying to make the unknown known. We do this naturally without having to think about it. I grew up in a city that was famous for its tourism, and I always wished that I was able to have the perspective of one of the tourists because they were able to see and experience the magic and charm because it was new to them that this same magic was invisible to me because I grew up there. I was a local. But when I moved to Los Angeles, I found myself wishing that I had the perspective of someone who grew up there, someone who was local. We are in this natural state of trying to obtain the alternate perspective. When we live somewhere hot, we wish we were somewhere cold. When we live somewhere cold, we wish it was somewhere hot. When it's raining, you wish it was sunny. When it's sunny, you wish it was raining. This is how you can get a philosophy, for example, Schopenhauer, that man's natural state is discontent. But I think that this is a bit too constricted, a bit too nearsighted. I think if you expanded this and just simply stated that life's natural state is to go where it hasn't been, to be where it isn't, to grow, expand, to learn, then everything makes a lot more sense. The one thing that's common across all humanity that we often cite as the source of many of our problems is this simple idea that we want to have our cake and eat it too. This is something that is natural to us. And what this says is that we want the ultimate perspective. We want total perspective. We want to be able to see it both ways simultaneously. And I think that this is ultimately what is calling us, what we are all striving toward. This is what everything is striving toward, every particle, every species. I believe that this is what evolution is. Life is involved in some kind of strange process of collapsing chaos into a possibility. Life is obviously becoming something. The amount of possibilities are virtually infinite. The amount of different ways that things can happen is infinite. And just like how we see with chaotic systems, if you combine all of these different unique perspectives and you zoom all the way out, you will see the unseeable, the strange attractor. But I could talk about this for hours, and this video is already long. It may be the longest video I have yet, so I'm going to end it here. Like the video, do all of the normal things that the YouTubers ask to support the channel. Consider becoming a member if you want to get my private videos, or if you just simply want to support the channel. My members are the lifeblood, the essence of this channel. So thank you to all of my members and everyone who supports. The thing that life appears to demand from all of us is that we grow. So I encourage everyone to go out there and learn something new, do something new, introspect, reflect, do whatever you feel works for you. And until next time, y'all have a blessed day.